Police officers humiliated a black woman. Moments later, she revealed who she really was. The street was loud in that normal American way. Cars rolled past. People talked on phones. Someone laughed near a coffee shop. Nothing felt unusual. Then the police lights came on. Red and blue flashed across the glass windows, across parked cars, across her face. The woman stopped walking. She was dressed simply. Clean coat, neat hair, phone in her hand. She had just stepped off the curb when a police cruiser pulled in behind her. An officer stepped out. "Ma'am," he said loudly, "turn around." Heads turned. People slowed down. Some kept walking, pretending not to see. Others stopped completely. The woman turned slowly, calm, no sudden movements, no attitude. "Yes, officer?" she said. Her voice was steady, not nervous, not angry. That was the first thing that annoyed him. "What's your hurry?" The officer asked. "You look nervous." "I'm not," she replied politely. "I was just crossing the street." The second officer joined him, younger, smiling in a way that didn't feel friendly. "Mind telling us where you're going?" the second officer asked. She hesitated, not because she was scared, but because the question didn't make sense. "I don't see how that's relevant," she said calmly. The smile disappeared. "Well," the first officer said, raising his voice slightly, "when we ask a question, you answer it." People were definitely watching now. A man across the street pulled out his phone but didn't start recording yet. A woman near the bus stop frowned. The black woman stood straight, shoulders back, hands visible. "Officer," she said, still calm, "am I being detained?" The words landed heavier than she expected. The first officer laughed, loud and sharp. "You think you're a lawyer now?" he said. A few people shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just asking a question," she replied. "Here's my question," the second officer said. "What's in the bag?" He pointed at the small bag hanging from her shoulder. "Personal items," she said. "Open it." She blinked once. "Do you have a reason to search it?" That was when the mood changed. The first officer stepped closer. Too close. "You're getting real smart with us," he said. "You got something to hide?" "No," she answered. "But I do have rights. That did it. You hear that?" the officer said loudly, looking around. "She's telling us how to do our job." A few people shook their heads. Someone whispered, "This isn't right." The officer reached for her bag. She didn't pull away, didn't yell, didn't cry. She simply said, "Please don't." The bag opened. Items fell onto the sidewalk. A notebook, keys, a small framed photo that slid face down. The officer nudged it with his boot. She looked down at the photo, but didn't rush to pick it up. That silence spoke louder than any protest. "Careful," the second officer said mockingly. "You dropped something important?" She met his eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "It is." The crowd felt it. Something shifted in the air. A man finally lifted his phone and started recording. "Is this really necessary?" a woman asked from the sidewalk. The first officer snapped back. "Ma'am, keep moving." The black woman took a slow breath. "Officer," she said, "may I ask what description I match?" The first officer paused. "We don't need to explain ourselves to you." She nodded once. "I see." That answer, calm, controlled, irritated him more than anger would have. "You got ID?" he demanded. "Yes." She reached slowly into her coat and handed it over. The officers studied it. Their faces didn't change yet, but something subtle flickered. They stepped aside, whispered. She stood there, alone, watched. She could feel eyes on her back, on her skin, on her calm. A voice inside her said what she had learned long ago. "Stay steady. Don't give them a reason." The first officer came back. "You're real confident for someone in your situation," he said. She met his stare. "I'm confident because I know who I am," the officer scoffed. "You think that makes you special?" She paused, just long enough for the crowd to lean in. "I think it means," she said quietly, "that you should choose your next words carefully." The street went quiet. Even the traffic noise felt distant. The officer laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. "Or what?" he said. She didn't answer. She just looked at him, calm, unshaken, certain. Behind him, the police radio crackled. "Unit 7, the dispatcher said. "Run that ID again." The officer frowned. "What?" he muttered. The dispatcher repeated herself, confirming identity. "Please repeat the name." The officer looked down at the ID, then back at her. For the first time since the stop began, he didn't look confident. And the woman finally bent down, picked up the photo from the ground, and held it close. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The officer held her ID like it offended him. He flipped it over once, then again. "You sure this is you?" he asked. "Yes," the woman replied. Her voice didn't shake. That bothered him. The second officer leaned closer, lowering his voice like he was doing her a favor. "You know," he said, "things would go easier if you stopped acting so." Confident, she looked at him calmly. "I'm not acting," she said. "I'm just standing here." Behind them, the crowd had grown, not loud, not angry, just watching. A man whispered, "Why are they still holding her?" A woman shook her head slowly. The first officer turned his back to her and spoke into the radio. "Yeah, I need confirmation. Now." Static crackled. She waited. She had learned a long time ago that silence could be stronger than arguing. That calm made some people uncomfortable, especially those used to control. The second officer nudged the items on the ground with his boot. "Pick those up," he said. She didn't move right away. "Please don't touch my things," she said instead. He laughed. "You dropped them." "I didn't," she replied. "You did." The laughter stopped. "You want to get arrested?" he snapped. "For what?" she asked quietly. "For resisting." She breathed in, slowly, carefully. "I haven't resisted anything," she said. "I've cooperated." The first officer turned around sharply. "You don't tell us what cooperation looks like." The words hung heavy. A young man across the street finally spoke. "Man, she ain't done nothing." "Sir," the officer barked, "mind your business." The woman glanced at the young man and gave a small nod, a thank you without words. Then she looked back at the officers. "Officer," she said, "may I make a phone call?" The second officer burst out laughing. "A phone call?" he said. "What is this, a movie?" The first officer smirked. "Who you gonna call? Your lawyer?" She didn't respond. The radio crackled again. "Unit 7, the dispatcher said, slower this time. "Please confirm spelling of the last name." The officer's jaw tightened. He turned slightly away, covering the radio with his hand. "Why are they asking again?" he muttered. The second officer leaned in. Probably a glitch, but something didn't feel like a glitch anymore. The woman noticed it. She noticed the way their shoulders stiffened, the way their jokes stopped, the way their confidence started cracking. She stayed still. The first officer walked back to her. "You live around here?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Where?" "Nearby," he scoffed. "Figures." That word carried weight. The woman looked at him carefully now. "I'd like your badge number," she said. The crowd inhaled as one. The officer laughed again, but this time it sounded wrong. Thin. "You serious?" "Yes." "Why?" She didn't raise her voice, didn't insult him. "Because," she said, "I believe accountability matters." The second officer stepped closer again, too close. "You're pushing it," he whispered. She met his eyes. "No, I'm enduring it." That sentence landed hard. A woman in the crowd covered her mouth. The dispatcher's voice came back, clearer now. "Unit 7. Supervisor has been notified. Stand by." The first officer froze. "What?" he said into the radio. "Supervisor en route," the dispatcher repeated. The officer lowered the radio slowly. He looked at the second officer, then back at the woman. "You didn't need to do all this," he said quietly, trying to save face. She tilted her head slightly. "I didn't," she said. "You did." For a moment no one spoke. Cars passed. A horn honked far away. The woman bent down and picked up her notebook, her keys, the photo. She brushed the dirt off the frame gently. The second officer scoffed. "What's so special about that picture?" She looked at the photo, then at him. "It reminds me," she said, "why I stay calm in moments like this." He rolled his eyes. "Whatever helps you sleep." She stood back up. "Officer," she said, "you asked earlier why I was so confident." He said nothing. "It's because," she continued, "this isn't the first time I've seen power misused." The crowd leaned in. "And it won't be the last," she added, "unless people start paying attention." A police SUV turned the corner in the distance. Lights off. Slow approach. The first officer noticed it and swallowed hard. The second officer suddenly adjusted his posture, straightened his vest. "Looks like your ride," he muttered. She looked toward the approaching vehicle, then back at them. "I didn't call anyone," she said calmly. "I didn't have to." The SUV pulled closer. The woman clasped the photo to her chest. And for the first time since the stop began, the officers looked nervous. The police SUV slowed as it came closer. Not fast, not urgent. That made it worse. The woman stood still, her hands folded in front of her, calm, like she was waiting for an elevator, not standing in the middle of a public standoff. The crowd, on the other hand, was changing. A young man finally lifted his phone higher. This time, he didn't hesitate. "I'm recording," he said out loud. The first officer snapped his head around. "Sir, put that phone down." The man shook his head. "Nah, this is my right." A ripple moved through the crowd. Another phone came up. Then another. The woman didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at the crowd. She kept her eyes on the officers. The second officer shifted his weight. "You trying to make this bigger than it needs to be?" he asked her. She answered calmly. "You already did." That sentence landed. The first officer stepped closer again. His voice dropped low, meant only for her. "You think these people are gonna help you?" She looked past him, not at the crowd, but at the buildings, the street, the city. "I'm not asking them to," she said. "I'm asking you to do your job correctly." His jaw tightened. A woman from the crowd spoke up, her voice shaky but loud enough. "What exactly did she do?" The officer turned sharply. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you." The woman didn't back down. "It concerns all of us when we see someone treated like this." Silence followed. The woman being detained felt it, that shift. The moment when fear stopped being one-sided. The dispatcher's voice returned, louder through the radio. "Unit 7, supervisor is 3 minutes out." 3 minutes. The first officer exhaled slowly through his nose. "Let's just wrap this up," he muttered. He turned to the woman. "We're gonna need you to step over here." "Why?" she asked. "So we can detain you." "For what reason?" she asked again. For interfering." She didn't raise her voice. "I haven't interfered," she said. "I've answered your questions. I've stood where you told me. I've stayed calm." The crowd murmured. "That's true," someone said. "You're escalating," the officer snapped. She nodded once. "You are." That was when the second officer lost patience. "You people always do this," he said under his breath. Not quiet enough. The street froze. Every head turned. The woman's expression didn't change, but her eyes did. She looked directly at him. "I'm asking you to repeat that," she said calmly. He didn't. A man in the crowd said, "Nah, he said it." Another voice added, "We heard it." The first officer shot the second a warning look. "Watch your mouth," he hissed. The woman took a slow breath. "This is exactly why I stayed calm," she said. "So there would be witnesses," the second officer scoffed. "Witnesses don't mean anything." She tilted her head slightly. "They do," she said. "Especially when they're recording." The radio crackled again. "Unit 7, the dispatcher said carefully. "Be advised. Identity confirmation is pending. Please maintain current status. Pending." The word hit the officers like ice water. The first officer looked down at the ID again, then back at her. "You sure this isn't fake?" he asked. She smiled, just a little. "If it were," she said, "you wouldn't be waiting for confirmation." That smile didn't comfort him. It scared him. The police SUV stopped a short distance away. The engine idled. The supervisor hadn't stepped out yet. The pause stretched. A woman from the crowd stepped forward slightly. "She's been standing here a long time." "Ma'am, back up," the officer said, less confident now. The woman obeyed, but didn't leave. The detained woman spoke again. "Officer," she said, "I want to be clear. I'm not here to embarrass you." The first officer laughed bitterly. "Too late for that. I'm here," she continued, "because what's happening to me happens to people without cameras every day." The crowd went quiet. That wasn't anger talking. That was truth. The second officer looked away. The radio chirped one more time. This time, the dispatcher's voice was different, lower, serious. "Unit 7. Confirmation received. Supervisor has full details." The first officer's face drained of color. "What does that mean?" the second officer asked. The first didn't answer. He looked at the woman, really looked at her, for the first time. Not as a suspect, not as a problem, but as someone who knew exactly what was happening. She met his eyes. "I told you earlier," she said softly, "to choose your words carefully." The supervisor's door opened. The crowd leaned in, phones stayed up, and the woman stood tall, calm, composed, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. The supervisor stepped out of the SUV slowly, not rushed, not angry. That calm was louder than sirens. He adjusted his hat, scanned the crowd, then looked at the two officers. One quick glance told him everything wasn't under control. "Who's in charge here?" he asked. The first officer straightened up. "I am, sir." The supervisor nodded once. Then his eyes moved to the woman. She stood a few feet away, calm, still holding the small photo against her chest. "What's going on?" the supervisor asked. Before the officers could answer, the dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio again. "Supervisor, confirmation is complete." The supervisor didn't respond right away. He held out his hand. "Let me see the ID." The first officer hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then handed it over. The supervisor looked down. "Read the name." "Read it again." His eyebrows lifted slightly. That was it. No gasp, no reaction, but the officers noticed. The supervisor glanced up at the woman, then back at the ID, then at the officers. "How long has she been detained?" he asked. The first officer cleared his throat. "Just a few minutes." The crowd reacted instantly. "That's a lie," someone said. "She's been here way longer," another voice added. Phones stayed raised. The supervisor raised a hand. "I'll handle it." He turned back to the woman. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "are you all right?" She nodded. "I am." Simple answer. No drama. "I apologize for the inconvenience," the supervisor said. The word apologize landed hard. The first officer stiffened. "Inconvenience?" the woman repeated gently. "That's one way to put it," the supervisor exhaled. "May I ask why you didn't identify yourself sooner?" She met his eyes. "Because," she said, "respect shouldn't depend on who someone is." The crowd went silent. That wasn't anger. That was disappointment, calm and heavy. The supervisor nodded slowly. He turned to the officers. "Step aside," they did, reluctantly. The supervisor lowered his voice. "You ran her ID twice. Why?" The first officer spoke quickly. "She was acting suspicious." The supervisor raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious how?" Silence. The second officer tried. "She refused to answer questions." "She asked if she was detained," the supervisor corrected. "That's not refusal." The second officer looked down. The supervisor looked back at the woman. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "for the record, would you like to state who you are?" She paused. "Not for suspense, for choice." Then she spoke. My name, she said calmly, is on that card. The supervisor nodded. And my role, she continued, is one that requires me to understand procedure, especially when it's ignored. A murmur spread through the crowd. The first officer swallowed. Sir, he said quietly to the supervisor, we didn't know. The woman turned her head slightly. That's the problem, she said. You shouldn't need to know. The supervisor looked at both officers. You're relieved from this interaction, he said firmly. Step back. Their faces tightened. Yes, sir, they said together. The supervisor turned back to the woman. I'd like to speak with you privately, he said. She shook her head. No, she said. I'm comfortable right here. The crowd leaned in. The supervisor hesitated, then nodded. I understand, he said. He took a breath. Ma'am, he said, you are free to go. She didn't move. Before I do, she said, I want something on record. The supervisor waited. I want it noted, she said, that this stop escalated without cause, that my belongings were searched without consent, and that language was used which no officer should ever use. The supervisor nodded. Noted. The first officer's face flushed. The woman looked at him, not with anger, but with clarity. This didn't need to happen, she said. And it doesn't have to happen again. The supervisor turned to the officers. You'll both submit written statements, he said. Immediately. Yes, sir, they replied. The woman finally took a step back. The crowd exhaled as one. She adjusted her coat, slipped the photo back into her bag. As she turned to leave, the supervisor spoke again. Ma'am, he said quietly. Thank you for how you handled this. She paused, then turned. I didn't handle this for thanks, she said. I handled it for the people who don't get to walk away. She walked past the crowd. Phones followed her for a moment, then lowered. She didn't look back. Behind her, the officer stood silent, and the supervisor stared at the ID one last time, as if realizing just how close they had come to something much worse. The street didn't return to normal. Not yet. People stayed where they were, as if something unfinished still hung in the air. The woman had been told she was free to go, but freedom, after humiliation, doesn't feel instant. She stood there for a moment longer. The supervisor turned slightly toward the officers. His voice dropped, firm and controlled. You two, he said, stand over there. They obeyed. No arguing now, no jokes, no raised voices. Just compliance. The woman noticed it. The way their shoulders were tense, the way their eyes avoided hers. A few minutes ago, they had spoken loudly, confidently, like the street belonged to them. Now, they looked smaller. The supervisor faced the woman again. Ma'am, he said, I want you to know this situation is being taken seriously. She nodded once. I believe you, she said. But believing isn't the same as fixing. The supervisor didn't interrupt. She continued. You stopped me because I didn't look like someone you thought belonged here, she said calmly. Not because I did anything wrong. The words weren't angry. They were precise. The crowd listened closely. The first officer shifted his weight. That's not true, he muttered. The woman turned her head slightly toward him. Then explain the reason for the stop, she said. Silence. The supervisor looked at the officer. Go ahead. The officer opened his mouth, closed it. The second officer tried instead. We received a vague description. The woman raised an eyebrow. Vague how? He didn't answer. The supervisor sighed. That's enough. The woman spoke again, softer now. I want to be clear, she said. I'm not here to punish anyone. That surprised the crowd. The officers looked up. I'm here, she continued, because moments like this leave marks. Even when people walk away. She looked down at her hands briefly. Then back up. I carry those marks. So do a lot of people watching right now. A woman in the crowd wiped her eyes. The supervisor nodded slowly. I understand, he said. The first officer suddenly spoke again, defensive now. We didn't know who she was. The woman turned fully toward him. And if I wasn't who I am? She asked. The question cut deep. He had no answer. That's the part you need to sit with, she said. Because most people don't get a radio confirmation. The second officer stared at the ground. The supervisor cleared his throat. We'll review the body camera footage, he said. Immediately, the woman nodded. Good, she said. Because the cameras didn't just record you, he frowned slightly. They recorded the silence, she explained. The pauses, the assumptions. She looked at the small crowd. And they recorded witnesses. Several people nodded instinctively. The supervisor turned to the officers again. You'll both remain on administrative duty until further notice, he said. Their heads snapped up. Yes, sir, they said quietly. The woman took a step toward the supervisor. One more thing, she said. He leaned in slightly. Of course, I don't want a public apology, she said. Not today. The supervisor blinked. May I ask why? Because apologies without change are just noise, she replied. The crowd murmured. She continued. I want training, review, accountability that doesn't disappear in a week. The supervisor nodded slowly. That can be arranged. The woman glanced at the officers one last time, not with anger, with clarity. You both had power today, she said. And you used it carelessly. The first officer swallowed. The second officer finally spoke, his voice low. I didn't realize, he said. She looked at him. That's why this matters, she replied. She adjusted her bag, slipping the photo safely inside. Then she turned to leave. As she walked past the crowd, people stepped aside, not because they were afraid, but because they respected her space. Someone whispered, she's strong. Someone else said, she shouldn't have had to be. She reached the corner of the street and paused. The supervisor called out gently. Ma'am? She turned. You asked earlier why I stayed calm, she said before he could speak. He nodded. She held his gaze. Because when I lose my calm, she said, people stop listening, and today, people needed to listen. The supervisor nodded deeply. She turned back and walked away. Behind her, the officers stood still, not angry, not defensive anymore, just quiet. And for the first time since the stop began, the street felt different, not healed, but aware. The woman didn't walk far before the supervisor caught up. He didn't chase her. He didn't call out loudly. He simply walked faster. Ma'am, he said, stopping a few steps away. May I walk with you for a moment? She considered it, then nodded. Briefly, they walked side by side down the sidewalk. The crowd stayed back this time, watching, respecting the distance. I want to understand something, the supervisor said. You handled that situation better than most people would. She looked straight ahead. That's not a compliment, she said. It's a warning. He accepted that. You knew the procedures, he said. The language, the timing, the pauses. Most civilians don't. She stopped walking, turned to face him. I'm not most civilians, she said calmly. He waited. I work with systems like this, she continued. Not from the outside. From the inside. The supervisor's posture changed slightly. You're in law, he said carefully. I work with law, she corrected. And accountability. She started walking again. He followed. I've sat in rooms, she said, where people debate words like reasonable and suspicious like they're harmless. She shook her head slightly. They're not. The supervisor nodded slowly. I review cases, she continued. Stops, complaints, patterns. She glanced at him. And today, I became one. He exhaled. I'm sorry. I know, she said. But that doesn't undo the moment. They passed a storefront window. Their reflections moved together. You asked earlier why I didn't say who I was, she said. The truth is, I needed to see how it would go if I stayed silent. The supervisor stopped walking. She didn't. That sounds risky, he said. It is, she replied. But necessary. He caught up again. You wanted to see the system as it treats everyone else, he said. Yes, They walked in silence for a few steps. "I wasn't testing them," she added. "I was testing the gap." "What gap?" he asked. "The gap between policy and practice," she said. "Between training and instinct." The supervisor swallowed. "You fell into that gap today," she said gently. He didn't argue. They reached a quieter part of the street. The noise faded. "Do you know why I stayed calm?" she asked suddenly. "So things wouldn't escalate," he answered. She shook her head. "No," she said. "Because escalation would have made it about me." She stopped again. "And this," she said, "was never about me." He waited. "It's about the woman who freezes instead of speaking," she said. "The man who gets angry because no one listens. The kid who learns early that silence is safer." Her voice didn't break, but it came close. "I didn't want to give anyone an excuse to stop hearing me," she said. The supervisor looked down. "I want you to know," he said. "This will be addressed properly." She nodded. "I expect it to be. Internal review," he continued. "Body cams. Training revisions. That's a start," she said. They stood quietly for a moment. "You know," he said, "some people would have used their position to make an example." She smiled faintly. "I don't need to make examples," she said. "The footage will do that." He nodded. "Will you be filing a formal report?" he asked. She thought about it. "Yes," she said. "But not for the reason you think." He waited. "I want the language preserved," she said. The hesitation, the tone, the moment the crowd stepped in. She met his eyes. "That's where truth lives." He nodded slowly. A police siren wailed somewhere far away. Life moving on. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder. "I should go," she said. "Of course," he replied. She turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing," she said. He looked up. "Don't let this turn into a quiet memo no one reads," she said. "Don't let it fade." He nodded firmly. "It won't." She studied his face for a second. Then she nodded back. "Good," she said. She walked away. This time no one followed her. Behind her, the supervisor stood still, not as a man in charge, but as someone who had just seen the system from the wrong side of power. And he knew. There was no unseeing it. The street looked normal again. Cars moved. People walked. The crowd slowly disappeared. But behind the scenes, nothing was normal. The supervisor stood near the patrol cars with a tablet in his hand. His voice was calm, but firm. "Body cameras," he said. "Both of you, now." The officers hesitated, just a beat. "Now," he repeated. They reached up and activated them. The red lights blinked on, recording. Not just what they said, but how they said it. "How long were they off?" the supervisor asked. The first officer swallowed. "They weren't off, sir." "Good," the supervisor said. "Because this needs to be complete." The woman was already halfway down the block, unaware of every word and fully aware of what would follow. The supervisor turned to the officers. "You're being separated," he said. "Different vehicles." The second officer frowned. "Sir, is that really necessary?" "Yes," the supervisor replied. "It is. No argument this time." They moved apart. The supervisor dictated calmly into the tablet. "Stop initiated without clear cause. Search conducted without consent. Language used inconsistent with department standards." Each sentence felt heavier than the last. The first officer shifted uncomfortably. "We were just trying to..." The supervisor raised a hand. "This isn't about intention. It's about impact." The officer went quiet. Across the street, a man who had been recording earlier was still there. "Excuse me," he said carefully. "Is she okay?" The supervisor nodded. "She is. That didn't look okay," the man said. The supervisor didn't argue. "You're right," he said. "It wasn't." The man lowered his phone slowly. The supervisor turned back to the officers. "You'll both submit written statements before end of shift," he said. "You'll include exact wording, not summaries." "Yes, sir," they said. "And understand this," he added. This footage won't disappear into a drawer. The second officer looked up sharply. What does that mean? It means, the supervisor replied, that this is being reviewed above my level. That landed hard. The officer's shoulders dropped. In a quiet office miles away, a system was already starting to move. Flags were raised. Files opened. Patterns checked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. The woman sat in a cafe a few blocks away, staring at her coffee. She hadn't taken a sip. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt tight. Not fear, release. She pulled out the photo again, looked at it, then slipped it back into her bag. Her phone buzzed. A single message. Are you safe? She typed back. Yes, then paused. Added, but something needs to change. Back on the street, the supervisor finished his report. He looked at the officers one last time. This doesn't end today, he said. And that's the point. The first officer nodded slowly. The second officer stared at the pavement. They were escorted to separate vehicles. No cuffs. No shouting. Just the weight of knowing this wasn't going away. The supervisor stood alone for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone. Internal Affairs, he said when the line picked up. Yes, I'm calling about a stop that escalated. He glanced down the street, the direction the woman had walked. We need to do this right, he said. He ended the call. That evening, as the sun dipped low, the footage began to circulate internally. Not viral. Not public, yet, but it was clear. Clear enough to show tone. Clear enough to show silence. Clear enough to show how power shifted when eyes were watching. And somewhere in the city, the woman finally took a sip of her coffee. It tasted bitter, but honest. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply sat there, knowing something important had been set in motion. Not because she demanded it, but because she refused to disappear quietly. The night settled in slowly. City lights flickered on. Cars passed the cafe window in steady lines. Inside, the woman sat alone, her coffee now cold. She hadn't moved much. Not because she was weak, because she was finally letting herself feel everything she had held back. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. They're asking how you want to proceed. She stared at the screen. This was the moment people always imagined. The moment of power. The moment to demand consequences. She closed her eyes. For a second, she wasn't in the cafe anymore. She was younger, standing on a sidewalk just like that one, hands shaking, voice swallowed by fear. Back then, no one had asked how she wanted to proceed. She opened her eyes. The message still glowed. Across town, the supervisor sat in his office waiting. Reports stacked neatly. Screens paused on still frames from the body cameras. He knew the decision she made next would shape everything. The woman typed slowly. I want to speak. In person. Minutes later, she walked back toward the building where the officers were being held for statements. No cameras followed her now. No crowd. Just quiet hallways and tired lights. The supervisor met her at the door. Thank you for coming, he said. She nodded. This won't take long. They sat across from each other at a small table. He waited. I know what the usual response is, she began. Suspension, a statement, time passes, he nodded carefully. I could ask for that, she said. And maybe I should, she paused. But that wouldn't be honest. He leaned forward slightly. Honest about what? He asked. She folded her hands. About why this hurt, she said. And why it keeps happening. She looked up. I don't want them fired today, she said. The supervisor blinked. You don't? He asked. No, she replied. I want them educated, documented, watched. She continued before he could speak. I want this stop used in training, she said. I want recruits to see it, hear the silence. Watch the crowd turn, she swallowed. I want them to understand that power doesn't come from the badge. It comes from restraint. The supervisor sat back slowly. That's unusual, he said. She smiled faintly. So is dignity under pressure, she replied. A long pause followed. "May I ask why?" he said. She didn't answer right away. Then she spoke quietly. "Because if I only punish," she said, "nothing actually changes." Her voice wavered, just slightly. "And because," she added, "someone once showed me grace when I didn't deserve it." The supervisor didn't interrupt. "I didn't learn strength from being humiliated," she said. "I learned it from being seen." She stood. "That's all I ask now," she said. "For people to be seen before they're judged." He nodded slowly. "We can do that," he said. "I'll make sure of it." She picked up her bag. As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "You know," he said, "some people will say you went easy on them." She stopped at the door. "They can say whatever they want," she replied. "I didn't do this for comfort." She walked out. Down the hallway, through the doors, into the cool night air. Behind her, paperwork continued. Processes moved forward. Systems adjusted, not loudly, but deliberately. The officers would still face consequences. But now, those consequences carried memory. Outside, the woman paused under a streetlight. She looked up at the sky. For the first time since the stop, her shoulders relaxed. Not because justice was complete, but because it was finally honest. She took a deep breath and walked away, not as someone who had won, but as someone who had chosen something harder. The story didn't end that night. It never does. In the days that followed, the footage moved quietly through channels most people never see. Review boards, training departments, internal meetings where no one raised their voice, but everyone listened. The stop was labeled what it was: unnecessary, escalated, preventable. The officers were removed from patrol while the review continued. No headlines, no press conference. Just process, the slow kind that actually matters. The supervisor kept his word. The footage became part of training, not edited to soften it, not shortened to save time. Recruits watched the full stop, the pauses, the tone, the moment the crowd turned. They were asked one simple question at the end. At what point could this have ended differently? No one answered right away. Across the city, the woman returned to her life, work, meetings, deadlines. She didn't post about what happened, didn't speak to reporters, didn't tell the story herself. She didn't need to, because others did. A bystander uploaded a short clip, another shared context, then another. People recognized the calm before they recognized her. She never raised her voice. She knew her rights. They treated her differently once they knew. And then, slowly, her identity surfaced. Not as a headline, not as a flex, but as a fact. She wasn't powerful because of her title. Her title existed because she understood power. Some praised her restraint. Some wished she had gone further. Some argued nothing would change. She read none of it. Change doesn't announce itself. It shows up later, in smaller moments, in an officer choosing a different tone, in a stop that ends with respect instead of suspicion, in someone realizing calm isn't weakness. Weeks later, the supervisor received a message. A recruit had requested additional training after watching the footage. Not because he was told to, but because he said, "I saw myself in that stop, and I didn't like it." The supervisor forwarded the message without comment. He didn't need one. One afternoon, the woman stood at the same crosswalk where it all began. Same street, same noise, same city. This time, she crossed without interruption. No lights, no voices, just movement. She paused halfway across and looked around. People passed her without staring. That was the point. She reached the other side and smiled faintly, not because she had won, but because something had shifted. Not everything, but enough. Later that night, she took the photo out of her bag again, the one that had fallen to the ground. She cleaned the glass carefully and set it on her table. It reminded her of who she was before she learned to stay calm under pressure, and why she chose to stay that way. Because anger fades, because noise passes, but dignity? Dignity leaves a mark. The officers would move on. The department would adjust. The city would keep breathing. And somewhere, another woman would remember this story, not because she knew the name, but because she recognized the strength. The strength to stand still. The strength to speak softly. The strength to demand change without demanding attention. She had been humiliated, yes, but she had also revealed something far more powerful than her identity. She revealed what happens when someone refuses to disappear quietly.